So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we make a return to a map we've not seen in quite a long time. This is the Witch King's Sanctum, albeit we're not going to be seeing any evil factions on display today, though we are going to be seeing something of a classic matchup, certainly in greater fantasy, maybe to a lesser extent in Lord of the Rings, but it's still somewhat present. The elves taking on the dwarves. I don't know what would necessarily lead the elves to be digging in on a mountainside such as this. They clearly haven't been here very long, otherwise I'm sure they would have torn down all of the monuments to Sauron the Dark Lord. But here they are nonetheless in a very defensible position as the dwarves will be attacking into them. It's a fascinating matchup actually. The dwarves on the attack have definitely got the quality to go toe to toe with the elves and have also got enhanced defensive abilities of course with their armour. Yet the elves have also got enhanced offensive abilities at range as well, so will that cancel one another out? Will the quality of the elves still be too much? We shall wait and see. It is going to be Lothlorien and Imladris taking on a litany of dwarves, of course. Khazad-Dum and Erebor, for now, the only ones in the game, though Lothlorien will be not far behind them in the very near future, I'm sure. But yeah, an interesting one. There will be a cut, of course, before we get into this battle, because it's quite a long way to transit, and the last time we saw this one, the little settlement right in front of us has been the site of a battlefield, but in a 3v2, I think that is somewhat more unlikely. But yes, we'll go through the attacking armies first and foremost, as we are wont to do. Starting off with Hammer here, who's playing as one of the Erebor armies. I think, actually it might just be the one Erebor army, we'll see. Ironfoot Warriors, the standard Dwarven infantry, which is going to be very useful in this battle because they do have the decent defensive stats of course, and efficiency is always the name of the game when you're on the attack, even if you're playing as more quality focused factions like the Dwarven ones that are on offer. And yeah, the Ironfoot Warriors will still be a little bit, well, will still be lagging behind a little bit the Elven Defenders, certainly, with the extra funds that the Elves are bound to have. But the Ironfoot Warriors, still a perfectly fine combatant, and numbers are something that the Dwarves will be wanting to leverage as much as they possibly can. We have polearms as well, the Ironfoot Pikes. Both of the defending armies have access to pikes, and higher tier pikes than this as well, though we've seen time and time again when we see more classic matchups with the dwarves perhaps on the defence and the orcs and the like on the offence. Numerous polearms are still perfectly fine and perfectly viable in a situation such as this, but even with the dwarven plate armour, they are still going to be more vulnerable to the very deadly elven missiles that are going to be coming their way, I'm sure. Plenty of them though, so going pretty heavily in for quality as well, so not wanting to lag too far behind the elves clearly. This is always a big temptation I've noticed with the dwarven armies, and I get it, multiple HP infantry in this version of the game is effective as you would want it to be. It's not quite the same sort of difference that you see between high tier infantry, or high tier cavalry and medium tier cavalry. And I think this is a little bit of a trap for the dwarves to fall in on this occasion, because I think the elves are going to be more worried about a more numerous army, and going full in for the bodyguard units, as tempting as it may be, can often leave you feeling a little bit exposed when your units start to tumble in terms of the manpower that they have. Dragon Slayers of Erebor though, the armour-piercing attacks on them as well as the very fine defensive and offensive base stats are still going to be useful, and it is the sort of unit that ultimately will give anything from Lothlorien and Imladris a run for their money. Not necessarily beat everything outright, but certainly damage them. Highborns of Erebor, more of a defensive focused bodyguard tier unit, the tankiest sword and board bodyguard unit that Erebor have. Not quite as strong as one of Khazad-Dum's offerings, which I'm sure we'll get into in just a moment, but still more defensive, going to be able to withstand that elven pressure a little bit more so. The Obsidian Guard actually may very well be one of the more efficient picks to bring against the elves. The enhanced melee defense means that they statistically match up better with the elves in terms of defensive stats, but they also pair this with the very high armor values that high tier dwarven units tend to have, so very, very difficult to kill, at least in melee. At range, of course, the lack of a shield may make them tempting targets for especially Lothlorien's general units, but we'll see. A couple of units of Erebor Legionaries, the higher tier version of the Ironfoot Warriors that we've already seen, will be able to go toe to toe with the elves a little bit more effectively than their lower tier brethren, though once again the elves will be pleased that they decided to opt in for smaller armies here, I think. And then there's also the Axe Guard of Erebor. One thing the only Lothlorien have among the elves are heavy axemen units, so big charge value and also lots of good armor-piercing damage. Armor-piercing damage, ironically enough, is going to be more effective against the dwarves than for them on this occasion, but Imladris and Lothlorien pack on enough armor to the point where armor-piercing is still useful against them, unlike their lighter cousins from Mirkwood and Linden, against which armor-piercing is not really the way. But yeah, interesting group of units this. Fairly unorthodox considering the situation. It would be more the sort of tactic you would expect the dwarves to go into if they were on the defence. Actually, there are a couple of units of Ironfoot crossbows over here, or just the one. But yeah, crossbows will be useful, of course. Sight lines are going to be fairly difficult on a map with such extreme elevation differences, such as this one. But even still, Ironfoot crossbows with plenty of armor-piercing punch going to be the sort of thing which the elves will rightly be very worried about, because again, that sort of skirmishing is not the sort of thing that they can afford to take too much of, with their numbers also presumably going to be fairly low. Then we have Tuck the Gamer playing as Khazad-Dum. We have some Legion bodyguard here. Similar in many ways to the Highborns of Erebor, they're more of a standard sword and weapon bodyguard unit. Not armor-piercing attacks in melee, not anything extra about their defense in terms of hit points, but they're still very, very solid nonetheless. Once again, I feel as though we're going to be going full in for the bodyguard units here with the Guards of Khazad-Dum as well, very similar to the Dragon Slayers that we've already seen. That would be an interesting matchup actually. I think the Guards of Khazad-Dum are very slightly the stronger unit, but I could be wrong about that. I've never seen them fight directly in a vacuum after all. But yes, Guards of Khazad-Dum, very, very strong, armor-piercing attacks, the sort of thing which the elves will be worried about once again. The elves, that is something to be said for this, I suppose. The elves cannot rely on a sheer quality advantage when the dwarves are on station and when they are bringing these kinds of units. Sons of the Fallen, much more of a defensive all-rounder once again, with being a spear unit, naturally a little bit more solid on the defence. Very, very capable of withstanding a beating, though even though they are a higher tier unit, the Spear Malice will be coming into effect here and they will be doing certainly less damage against the very high melee defense elves. Then, a couple of units of Hammers of Gundabad. Morale actually is something the dwarves will need to keep an eye on here, given the fact that the elves themselves will be able to keep fighting for a long period of time. The dwarves are going to have to march into situations which could definitely be seen as not ideal for them. So morale may be called into question, especially for Erebor, but the Hammers of Gundabad being locked morale means that won't be an issue for them, and of course more armor-piercing attacks, more very high base damage from this unit of shock infantry. Just in behind we have some Warriors of Khazad-Dum, very much the same sort of thing as the Ironfoot Warriors over in Erebor, a standard dwarven infantry unit which efficiency is the name of the game, like I said, and this is the kind of unit which can offer you plenty of that when you are on the attack. Got some Legion units as well, plenty of Legion units in fact. All unupgraded, so not able to afford the armour upgrade on this occasion, which will make them a little bit more vulnerable. But ultimately, going for a bigger army I think is worth it, so even if you get one extra unit out of it, I think that's the best choice. 3rd Legion Infantry, very similar to the Erebor Legionaries we've already seen, though I would give the edge to the Erebor unit when the 3rd Legion Infantry have to leave their plate armour at home. And then we also have the Spear variant, the 4th Legion Shield Guard, so not going to be as dangerous at dealing damage in melee. But they will hold the line for a little bit longer because of the latent defensive abilities that spears tend to have, and more warriors as well. Doesn't look like they've gone for any archers, but then less tempting of a unit to bring in this kind of situation on this kind of map, given the spread of units. And it is going to be Ricky Beagle who's playing as another Khazad-Dum army, as if, just to prove me wrong immediately, here are the Orc Hunters of Khazad-Dum. More of a range presence, of course. They do have decent damage, but they're not going to be able to out-skirmish the elves, both because of terrain and because of the high-tier elven archers being better than them. But it does give them a tool to at least pressure the elves when they're on their hillside. We have some sentries of Khazad-Dum, very similar to the Ironfoot pikes over on the other side, so a nice anchor for the dwarves to try and fall back upon. Once again, the quality will probably be in the elves' favour when it comes to a pike war on this occasion, but at least it means the dwarves aren't completely defenceless in that regard. Dwarven miners as well, so a nice little militia tier unit, this easy prey for elven archers, but they do have that slightly better attack score than most other militia units the game has to offer. Another unit of the Legion bodyguard here. We have some Khazad-Dum reclaimers throwing axes. Actually, again, another good choice of unit I think on this occasion. If the elves really do dig in and you're struggling to break them down, then axe throwers make for fantastic phalanx busters with the very high base damage that they can rely upon. So they're going to be here. In front of them we have some 3rd Legion infantry, several units of which, more armour piercing from the guards of Khazad-Dum as well. Once again the Legion units having to leave their armour upgrades at home. Going for the 2nd Legion Axe Guard as well, a little bit cheaper than the locked morale hammers of Gundabad, though of course naturally they do not have a locked morale, so that's something to bear in mind, but still nice damage spike from them. Some Sons of the Fallen once again to try and bolster that defensive ability that the dwarves have on the front line, and another unit of Orc Hunters, so not the biggest armies by any means on the attack today, but I'm sure that will be reciprocated by the defenders, if not even more so. We have Ankles playing as Lothlorien Riders of the Golden Wood. I don't know how useful mobility is going to be, but at the very least it does give you another high tier archer unit, and unlike most horse archers, because they are high tier elves and they have Silverthorn arrows, they are actually worthwhile using as just a standard unit of archers as much as anything else. Late game you may even be able to use them as makeshift rudimentary shock cavalry. March Wardens of the Wood, like I said earlier on, morale may very well prove to be a little bit of an issue for the dwarves. Even Khazad-Dum, as stout as they are, may end up starting to waver in the face of very high elven pressure, and the sort of thing which may very well push them over the edge is going to be the poison projectiles from these March Wardens here. Interesting to see if that does pan out. Got some Lorenan Axemen and Lorenan Swordmasters on the front line, high quality upper end units, the heavier stock from Lothlorien, and they will be able to go toe to toe with any of the standard Dwarven units, and they should be able to beat most of the standard Dwarven units as well. So when you start to get into the upper tier units, it becomes a little bit more questionable when it comes to the Legion, and then pushing further on as well, the high tier bodyguard units will of course be an issue, but again, quality the order of the day here for the defenders. Woodland Protectors, Javelins, armour-piercing attacks of any kind are going to be very useful, and they does tend to be something that's a little bit unaccounted for in Elven rosters. Lothlorien have more of it than most, but they are going to have to use their Javelins wisely. Ammunition management very key for any good defender. March Wardens of the Wood, more Lorenan Axemen, the Kindred of Celeborn with their split-shot projectiles. They don't have the armour upgrade, but just as important to Lothlorien as an infantry unit when they're out of ammunition, to be fair. Lothlorien's best offensive infantry, after all, combined with their very best archers. Lorenan archers are here. I did notice them in the back as well. The Carascaladon's Guardians, one of the best units of pikes in the game, if not the best. It depends on how highly you rate the 2nd hit point they have. Very, very good as far as an anchor goes. If they choose the right choke point to get into and they're not exposed to dwarven throwing axes or crossbow bolts, they could be match winners, but we'll see. Got some Watchers of the Golden Wood up here, the dismounted version of the Riders of the Golden Wood we've already seen, and of course a catapult which could be utterly devastating against the dwarves on the narrow approaches around which the elves are basing themselves here. And finally, last but not least, we have the Flame of Arnor, the player who sent me this battle replay. Been making a fair few custom scenarios of late, but this one on a map that was already created. Big thanks to him though, one of the main supporters of the channel into 2023, which is good to see. Noratuno Warriors, basic Elven Archer. They're more decent in melee than most, though. When it comes to dealing with Dwarven units, it's, again, that slightly increased melee damage is probably not going to be as useful as it would be against, for example, Orcs. Still though, they will be able to chip in a bit more than their lighter brethren. Spears of Rivendell for a makeshift phalanx as well. Again, these basic Elven units, not going to be quite as domineering as they would be against most of the opponents they usually face, because of the nature of the dwarves being a high quality faction as well. Eldarenway archers, as with most things in Imladris' upper tier, they've got really, really high defensive values all around as a result of their armour and their melee defence. And obviously they've got high arrow damage as well. Spears of Rivendell, we have the Imladris sentries, not quite as strong individually speaking as the Carascaladon's Guardians, but they will still do a very sterling job on the front line as pikemen, and given the fact that the dwarves haven't decided to bring their 1st legion, they will be able to out-phalanx anything the dwarves have. We've got some more Spears of Rivendell. They will not, of course, they're a little bit lighter, but still, more polearms than anything else on display from Imladris. Eldarenway Spearmen and Gwaith-i-Arthand. The Gwaith-i-Arthand, obviously the Bodyguard Spear, a very, very solid front line indeed. We've got a couple of units of Archers of Rivendell as well. We have the Armour Piercing of the Gwaith-i-Myrdain. They don't have the armour upgrade, they don't necessarily need it, but this is of course another vector for armour piercing damage which the elves will need to be utilising to have success in this battle. Again, cavalry. The Gwaith-i-Rokdor Lance Knights, perhaps higher burst damage potential than the Riders of the Golden Wood, but certainly more difficult to use on a map like this. I'll be interested to see how this goes for the Flame of Arnor. And then we have the Eldarenway Swordmasters as well. Outside of bodyguard tier units, they have a shot at being the unit with the best stats in the game. I'm not entirely certain of that, but well, I'm certain of them being in with a shot. I'm not certain whether they would win that particular contest, but very, very high stats. The only thing they really lack is a second hit point, and they would be considered, you know, a bodyguard tier unit. 2 units of Imladris sentries as well, and the God Helene with yet more Silverthorn arrows. So, like I said, there's going to be a cut, probably a fairly lengthy one. The dwarves have got quite a long way to traverse, and they aren't exactly speed demons, as we know. So yeah, I'll make a cut, and we'll rejoin when the first blows are being struck. So it looks more than anything that we're going to have a phase at the start of this battle which is going to be centred around the Elven cavalry, which has been given enough time to escape from the top of the hill, and that was a very nice charge as well on Ricky Beagle's Khazad-Dum Reclaimers, which may prove to be one of the more dangerous tools that Khazad-Dum have in their arsenal on this occasion, because those throwing axes will be so useful at dismantling those very, very strong Elven Phalanx units at the summit of the hill. It is also worth bearing in mind that the other Elven cavalry unit may be even more useful actually for breaking up the Dwarven assault because of those Silverthorn arrows and because they can continuously shoot while going up the hill. It is where Orc Hunters of Khazad-Dum would have been more useful, but of course Tuck the Gamer's army does not have access to such things. Riders of the Golden Wood will begin firing as well. The telltale Elven battle cry is coming up, although actually no, they have decided not to. You can see here that the Gwythy Rock Door, if nothing else, are also going to make Ricky Beagle's transit to the path that they want to take up to the top of the hill much, much longer. Sons of the Fallen having to continuously act as a backstop. The Orc Hunters of Khazad-Dum can shoot into the Gwythy Rock Door, though it will take quite a while for their arrows to have the desired effect, given the multiple HP nature and high armour values of the Gwythy Rock Door. Meanwhile, here we go, the long column of Dwarven units moving forward. Ironfoot crossbows, are they the target? I think they are, and I think that is the best course of action as well, because these crossbows, we've seen crossbows in siege battles for both the attackers and the defenders be very, very decisive in the past. I mean, you may think that going after elite units might be the way, but I really don't think so, because the high-tier Dwarven units, even under Silverthorn arrow fire, are going to be very resilient against that sort of thing. And ultimately the elves have got the quality in stock to be able to go toe-to-toe with the dwarves in this fashion, whereas the crossbows are something they may not have an answer to if they get involved in the wrong kind of engagement. Meanwhile, nice position to be shooting down from there. Meanwhile, we see the aftermath of a charge there, and many more Dwarven units do fall. There are a few Elven Riders that die each time, and I think on this occasion it was because the Legion Bodyguard were on station as well, and with each swing of their axes a fair amount of damage is going to be forthcoming. I think the lion's share of the damage there was done to just a unit of Orc Hunters of Khazad-Dum, which is not terrible for the attackers. You've got to remember the Gwythy Rock Door are an expensive unit, so they are going to need to pay for themselves pretty significantly by going after good Dwarven targets. Killing off just a single unit of Orc Hunters of Khazad-Dum does not represent good value, but it does represent a stepping stone along the path to that. Mighty Rock Door moving back around. I mean, the Sons of the Fallen are the main danger here to the Gwythy Rock Door in melee. Meanwhile, these Dwarven units are getting pretty far ahead of the rest of their armies, you'd have to say. I mean, once again, Sons of the Fallen being used as a bit of a sweeping unit to try and deal with the cavalry. It's definitely not the sort of unit the cavalry wants to be getting involved with in melee at all, really. So it does make sense. But the rest of the army lagging a little bit further behind, though we shouldn't have to wait too long for them to catch up. Of course, multiple ways up here. The 3 choke points that are going to be utilised. Ricky Beagle still has a fairly long way to go. You can see the Gwythy Rock Door in the far distance there. They'll be making their way up and around over here. And then the 2 choke points from the front as well. Once again though, those Silverthorn arrows, and backs turned, Sons of the Fallen, so their shield value won't be coming into play. More likely to result in the deaths of valuable Dwarven units. let's not forget their manpower is hardly limitless in a situation like this. They may still have the numbers advantage over the elves, but it's not the sort of thing they can afford to be too blasé about. This is a map that was created back during the time where, you know, the maps were large and sweeping and there were lots of different sections to it, but back when we've never seen this lower section utilised. It's more for flavour than anything else, and that's because no one would want to march through there, no one would want to defend on the lowest part of the map. Ooh, and he did charge in there as well, the Gwaithir Rockdor. Going to need to leave pretty quickly. Doesn't look like a very effective charge, so the lances clearly did not come down. Trying to go after, maybe not enough room, and that means that more riders will also fall by the wayside. That was a charge that did connect, I believe. Although I say that once again, yeah, he's not really giving enough room for his cavalry to get up to charge speed. It's not really good enough to be too reactionary with your cavalry. You need to have a little bit more forward planning than that, and the Gwaithir Rockdor starting to showcase a few weaknesses of cavalry in this kind of situation, though that will be far better. Certainly more run-up done there, although once again the dwarves starting to move forward to cover up their dead, but again it wasn't a devastating charge that. The 3rd Legion very ready for it, so ready to deal with the charge effect a little bit more readily. Honestly, if I were the Flame of Arnor, I'd probably sequester my cavalry away at this point. Ricky Beagle has already largely made it to the point where he's going to be able to go up the hill and just leave a single unit of pikes behind. The late game may be the best place now to be utilising this. Meanwhile, the Lothlorien archers, more than just the Riders of the Golden Wood, are now starting to open up on the advancing dwarven units. Poison projectiles, though, you might want to save a few of the poison projectiles for later. I mean, for example, along here, poison projectiles are going to be potentially very, very useful. As has been mentioned several times, Erebor's morale is a little bit more suspect than Khazad-Dum's. I mean, we are talking about still high-tier factions and their morale, but little differences will add up here considering the factions on display today. And Erebor's morale may be found wanting with poison projectiles moving forward en masse. The Gwaithir Rockdor, I actually think this is a little bit of an error by the Flame of Arnor as well with the cavalry. I mean, I personally would leave them out in the open field so they can come from behind to attack these dwarven units, but at the very least there is an understanding that the Gwaithir Rockdor probably won't be able to be utilised to their fullest down there now, so going to be utilising them later. Ironfoot crossbows getting into place, but they need to make up their mind on what they're doing quickly, because they are one of the main targets for the elves here. If they can deny the dwarves their crossbow support, it is going to be a big boon for them. There is a Khazad-Dum as well. So the dwarves have taken losses getting up here, fairly consistent losses. You've also seen the charges down there, so softened up a little bit. And the Gwaithir Rockdor actually, I don't know if this was intentional, I think it was more of an intent to simply retreat first, but an opportunistic charge there by the knights, and more damage being done to the crossbows, and the Lothlorien cavalry also coming in here as well. Riders of the Golden Wood in slightly better condition than the Gwaithir Rockdor, given their adventures in the outer sections of the map already. And that's bad news for the Ironfoots. March Wardens still. There isn't any other ways up here. This was a map I really did enjoy when it came out. There's another section of like a sunken village, but previously we have seen more numerous defenders, so at least 3 armies, so effectively 1 layer forward is where we've seen defences set up in the past. Some Ironfoot warriors still pretty far away. Again, I'm not entirely sure why all of these units are still sort of hanging out down here, because I mean they're going to be really, really far away in the event of needing reinforcements. I don't understand what Hammer is necessarily thinking there, unless he's merely worried about the potential for taking arrow fire on the approach. But any attacker that's worried about taking arrow fire, like, you clearly haven't been paying attention while playing the game in the past, because there's no avoiding the fact that you're going to be taking hits from afar. You can try and mitigate them and that's fine, but to try and completely eliminate the damage taken, probably not going to be happening. You can see that the Ironfoot crossbows have done a little bit of damage here to the elves lying dead, but nowhere near as much. You can see the dwarven corpses very much littering the battlefield here already. 4th Legion Shield Guard now acting as a good stopper unit for the cavalry to get those charges off. This is an interesting thing though, because these crossbows need to be dealt with. Honestly, this would be the time for the poison projectiles, because you'd be able to rout them off. They're already shaken, they're very depleted. Instead of using regular ammunition, which is going to take a little bit more time, or even use flaming shot, because routing them is going to be more effective than trying to kill them off completely. You're going to end up wasting a bit more ammunition by doing it this way. But it is what it is, I suppose. Slowly but surely Ricky Beagle moving forward as well. Pikes at the front, which will prevent any of those opportunistic charges that this battle has already showcased. But it will be the ideal target for these elven archers, and Ankle's already sees that. He's going to be moving his Watchers of the Golden Wood forward. I mean, that's high tier arrows, but to be fair, I would be using the Watchers for this purpose as well. Pikes will be easy to kill for a unit like this. Pikes also, it would make the pike fight more dominant in favour of the elves, and also the Watchers. When their ammunition is used up, they're more useful as an infantry unit than pretty much anything else on the field. Even the Kindred of Caliborn, because of the increased numbers in this unit. Yeah, no shielded unit in front of them either, being used as that sweeping unit once again to try and push back against any sort of cavalry incursion. Also dwarven units though, Walk Hunters, will be hoping to do a little bit of damage to the elves at long range. Sons of the Fallen also here. What have we? Lauren armed archers continuing to fire away, and again I still think this is a bit of a waste. I mean, the March Ones of the Wood, like I said, would be ideally suited for this, though the dwarves might also be about to make a little bit of an error. Sending forward a single unit of 4th Legion is not going to end too well for them. As solid as they are as spears, arguably the best unit in class the game has to offer, they are going to be completely outmatched and overwhelmed. I mean, the Lauren-armed Axemen don't have a spear malice to contend with. They've got plenty of support nearby. Obviously heavier elven infantry like this is going to be more than capable of looking after itself as well. The 4th Legion Shield Guard starting the fight well, but 2 units of infantry, unit of warriors of Khazad-Dum on the way forward. A little bit of manoeuvring going on. Don't exactly know what's going on over here meanwhile. Yeah, there is also pushing forward over here as well. I mean, this is the problem that I'm seeing with the dwarves already. Like, those units from Hammer's Erebor army are far too far away, and if the idea was to sync up their assaults, Ricky Beagle is nearly there, but the timing is slightly off there as well. But also Erebor cowering back down at the base of the hill. This maybe speaks to the dwarven armies not being in step with one another, the communication being a little bit lacking, and the elves can certainly reap the rewards from that. Ugh, this cold I've got is really not shifting, sadly. Spears of Rivendell moving forward as well as a nice little anchor to the front line, and given the elves are already dominant in this fight, this will only increase the problems that the dwarves are currently tangling with. March Ones of the Wood going to reposition themselves. I didn't notice the Lothlorien Rangers anywhere in the composition phase, but if they reveal themselves they will be very, very useful as well. More dwarven units pushing forward. I mean, the elves can't afford to be too stingy with the units they're sending forward here. They can't afford to try and get away with too much, or too little, I suppose. But yeah, look at this. Like that. I don't think I like this. What are you doing? A situation that you can control relatively easily on the front line, and you're retreating already. This has been a... I don't know about this battle so far, to be honest, in terms of the decision making that's been on display. I mean, over here it's fine. Lothlorien still fighting hard. Catapult crew managing to hit the Ironfoot pikes that are around. I mean, I do understand why they're not going for the units right in front of them. The possibility of ripping through the back of your own men is simply too high, and the elves can't afford to be getting friendly fire like that. They are still down by an entire army, so they're going to need to take what they can get, but I think the dwarves are going to be allowed to get away with it a little bit by the elves here. They are going to leave some units behind as a rear guard, but this should embolden the dwarves to push forward further. Could it be that they don't really fancy the positioning of these particular areas? Do they want to be moving back? I mean, again, like I'm not really a huge fan of the very first time you're put under pressure, you immediately cave in and decide to try and retreat to the final layer. Like, that's a little bit, that doesn't sit quite right with me. But who knows? The dwarves may well be able to inflict some damage on the elves. Like I said, transitional phases always favour the attackers when the setup is such that the attackers have army advantages of any description. And the elves are enacting it so that there will be one pretty quickly. So dealing with some of these units. Again, the Swordmasters, the Sons of the Fallen will be able to withstand an awful lot of damage. The anchor of the sentries of Khazad-Dum in behind is probably the one and only time the dwarves will have a pike advantage, but you can see that some units are actually managing to slip through the net. The defensive position on the other side being called into question. It is Axguard of Erebor, so the Erebor units have hot-footed it up the mountain pretty quickly as far as dwarven units are concerned. And you can see here that the elves, well, started off pretty well for them. That unit of 4th Legion has taken an awful lot of damage, but they were nearly the tip of the spear. The rest of the units now moving forward. Ironfoot pikes, I mean, going for a full mass push kind of approach, and considering the elves have left their front lines undermanned in an effort to retreat to the final layer, this is the right way to approach the situation at hand. Off go the Riders of the Golden Wood. I mean, what are they going to do? What is the cavalry going to do now that they've effectively retreated to the final layer, which is up here? There's nothing really too grand about the final layer. The main, well, the summit of the hill is here, but it's not a part of the map that is accessible, which is a bit of a shame. The ANGMAR monument over there. Statues of Sauron everywhere. None of the Witch King though. That isn't an asset that exists in the game as it stands. And this one choke point is potentially really devastating. Maybe from an elven perspective, the thinking can be that the crossbows have been largely defanged, and that is the one unit that could have punished the elves pretty severely for going about their business in this way. Third Legion in the vanguard, Gwythi Rockdor stationed there, Lothlorien and Axemen moving forward, but yeah, the dwarves utterly victorious over here, unsurprisingly, and still a scary force. As much as the elves have got a pretty nasty choke point now to try and look after, the dwarves can withstand punishment better than most. Hammers of Gundabad continuing to move forward and continuing to inflict bits of damage on the Gwythi Rockdor. And you can see here the Hammers of Gundabad will be able to cut off Lothlorien and Axemen, and every little helps. I mean, 29 Lothlorien and Axemen come the end of the battle. We've seen smaller margins than that, so like I said, these transitional phases where the attackers can really make hay while the sun shines. But there's no avoiding the fact that the dwarves will now be completely in the open to these elven arrows as they rain down from on high, going after some of the more dangerous foes. I mean, the armour of the Hammers of Gundabad is significant, but no shield still makes them a better target than most. The Dwarven army doesn't really have too many soft targets, you'd have to say, and the soft targets that exist are not terribly scary anyway. Dwarven miners, all comes to Khazad-Dum and the like. I mean, here we can see the front line as it is. Imladris sentries, Karas Galadon's guardians, heavy spearmen from Imladris, arrow support. This is a scary one, especially with the catapult as well, so this will be pretty much one of the ultimate tests of dwarven metal. Can they overcome something like this? Rise of Khazad-Dum, setting themselves up into loose formation. The accuracy of the elves is such that, I mean, it will mitigate the damage a bit, and efficiency like that is how the dwarves have to approach this, I suppose. 3rd Legion on the way forward, Sons of the Fallen. Also on the way forward, Hammers of Gundabad to offer that armour-piercing offensive bite. Legion Bodyguard on the front line as well. I mean, Dwarven Bodyguard units in this kind of situation, attack or defence, are always going to be pretty damn scary. And it will help them equalise against the elven position they now find themselves having to tangle with. Archers of Rivendell, I mean, javelin fire, arrow fire, there's poison projectiles raining down, but as long as the dwarves keep this front line in good condition, I don't think the poison projectiles will be as deadly as they could have been earlier. Catapult crew still there. Still got a unit of pikes in reserve. I mean, there's not a huge amount that they're leaving to the imagination here, the elves, so we could be here for the long haul. This one, again, this is kind of the thing with designing a map like this, is it's vast and sprawling and there's so many features on it. But even when there were more armies on it, this section, this pathway, although more so higher up on it, was always where we saw the thickest of the fighting. Which is why when, I think, map design has moved along since then, and the maps we've seen since have been designed to the point where there isn't an obvious place on the map for defenders to be able to just turn it into a one choke point affair. Because if they can, they will, because that's often how the defenders can equalise against the superior numbers, and they can leverage their quality best. We've seen it many a time, and we're going to be seeing it once again here. Although it isn't quite so cut and dry for the elves here, because you can see that the dwarves do have a bit of forward momentum going. The catapult is all well and good, although that there was more friendly fire than anything else. They have to take that risk though, the elves. They've put themselves into this position because their supporting units can be at their most useful here, and the catapult is among those. They need to be getting central hits into this dwarven blob that has now formed. In conjunction with poison arrows as well, that might be enough to cause some panic in the more basic units the dwarves are going to have as part of this position. That was, again, a little bit of friendly fire there actually, but more so hitting the dwarves there that time at the very least. Split shots streaking through the air as well. I mean, the split shots are good in this position as well, much like the Hwacha when units are spread far and wide like this. You can't really do devastating damage to individual sections like you can with rangers, but you can spread the love, as it were, and do damage in that way. Orc Hunters getting a position. I mean, this is fairly ideal for the Orc Hunters as well. They're not really the main target of many of the elven units, and any damage they can do in support of this dwarven advance will be much appreciated, I'm sure. Victory seems certain so far for the dwarves, continuing to push back, and that's worrying for the elves, considering Gwaith y Myrdain are on the front line. Pretty much all of the high tier elven pikes are on the front line as well. Gwaith y Arthur and all of the very best elven tools are here, and yet the dwarves still enjoying a bit of that forward momentum we were speaking about. Lothlorien warriors, maybe their enhanced melee abilities will prove to be very useful. Here are the Karen Amroth Rangers. I mean, this is the unit that can really turn the battle. It's the crutch that defenders can use in this version of the game. One of the dwarven generals has fallen now. I mean, this is where you would imagine the battle could turn. I mean, Kindred of Celeborn, poison arrows, even the regular elven archers are going to be capable of doing an awful lot of damage. The catapult, well, there goes another dwarven general, so two falling in quick succession here, and this is why the elves will have fallen back to this position, because, as was just mentioned, this is where their supporting units, their ranged units, can be at their most brutal. Ooh, yeah, and that was a nice one as well. Dwarves don't really have a choice. They have to move forward. They have to try and buckle the elven position, but with that level of catapult fire, with the range support coming in, and let's not forget as well, most of the elven archers are also competent melee combatants as well, so they will be able to see the elves over the line in the late game if it comes down to it, especially with Lothlorien's bodyguard units being what they are. The God Hellim are also on station, let's not forget, trying to interrupt the firing patterns of the Orc Hunters back here. The Dwarves, pretty much all of the Dwarven army is also on station, as the Elven one is, so everyone just throwing everything in to this fight now and seeing what sticks. Just in behind as well, Kindred of Celeborn continuing to fire away. And further up the hill, God Hellim don't have the armour upgrade. I don't think that's going to be too important in the grand scheme. Firing angle for the Karen Amroth Rangers may not be ideal, and I do think this is the unit upon which the battle will tilt. Imladris, of course, don't have access to Rangers. Their upfront strength is very substantial as part of a defensive effort, but it does mean that they do greatly benefit from their elven cousins coming to give them a hand. All of the other three elven factions do have access to Rangers after all. I do wonder how Ered Luin would get on in this situation. Maybe a little bit less heavy armour focused than the dwarves, than the other dwarves that are already in the game, though of course still a big part of what they do. Their supporting units though, maybe a little bit more interesting. Stuff like Frost Spears, more of a Greek fire thrower in the mechanics of the game. Still raining down. Khazad-Dum Reclaimers trying to offer support to the Dwarven units. You can see that the Dwarves have been able to push the Elves back, which, considering they've been under the level of pressure that they have been, is very impressive. But in the long run, I don't think that they're going to be able to sustain this for too much longer. Ironfoot Warriors moving forward, I mean, they still have some high tier units. Honestly, it would be a very impressive feat if the dwarves were to be able to wade through all of this. The angle is not ideal for the elven support, but it's still good enough to the point where it's going to be vicious to try and wade through this. But also the elven front line, let's not forget, is also something which is pretty damn scary with the high tier pikes. I mean, the Imladris spears as well represent a really, really good defensive bulwark, all of them. Lothlorien add a little bit of extra damage and bite in melee as well to crack through those dwarven units. You can see there over 100 Ironfoot Warriors routing, perhaps an example of Erebor's slightly more flimsy morale in action. The odd projectile ripping through the air. Orc Hunters continuing to fire. Since the balance of forces is evenly matched, from a melee perspective that may still be the case, but I don't know if the dwarves are going to be capable of keeping this level of performance up in the long run. This is probably the sort of single engagement that would have caused my old PC to crash. Flaming shot raining down from on high. I think they sense the fact that the dwarven morale is starting to be a little bit shaky, so they are now actively targeting the mental side of this battle. Balance of forces evenly matched. 2nd Legion Axe Guard on the way forwards. Those projectiles still very, very nasty. Noratia knows. The catapult has fallen silent. Now, I don't think it's out of ammunition just yet, though I think they are maybe erring on the side of caution. I think they see the fact that as the battle goes on, they are more likely to see the better side of it. look at this, too much routing now and the dwarves starting to run low. I think I'd be fairly comfortable predicting an elven victory from this one. We'll go into why I'm maybe not the biggest fan of that in the endgame splash screen, I think, but I mean there's no doubting the fact that this is the smart way of handling things. And it has been perhaps testament to the level of support that the elves can lay onto their front line, because I mean most factions with that level of aggression the dwarves were showing, with the quality, without that level of support that the elves had in place, it wouldn't really have been doable to come away from that victorious. It is what it is here. Guards of Khazad-Dum moving forward, another roll of the dice perhaps. I mean, very dangerous in melee. That armour piercing, of course, as I've said several times, will not go to waste against these elven factions. It's not the be all and end all, but it certainly will help. And their rigidity in melee as well will also give the elves some pause. Defeat is still a distinct possibility though, because of the support coming in and plenty of elven archers still. It still says that the dwarves are favoured in this battle so far, which, like I said, I mean, if any faction can get themselves over the line, it would be the dwarves, and it would be incredibly impressive if they were able to do so, given the nature of the battle. There's still some Legion bodyguards, still some Khazad-Dum reclaimers, not really much else. What's going on down here? Rousing units, yeah, I mean they're running away from the fight, but just to be sure, there's also another unit of Ironfoot warriors, so a little bit more in terms of numbers to come in here, but I think they may end up routing pretty quickly. I mean, even stuff like the 2nd Legion are thinking of fleeing from the front line. Much of what the elves have left in melee, though, does look like out of ammunition skirmishers. There's still a fair amount of Khazad-Dum's Guardians. You can see that 2nd hit point has meant they have held up better than the Imladris sentries, of which I think this was the 2nd unit committed, and there's only 31 of them remaining. So it does go to show that 2nd hit point really does help out. One of the very best anchors in the game, if not the best, especially as part of a combined front line with a faction like Imladris, I would say. But much of the rest of it is out of ammunition archers. But as I said, like the fact that you're talking about archers that are out of ammunition potentially to come, like Elder Enway archers and God Helene, this is the sort of thing which can really give you a little bit extra in melee. Khazad-Dum reclaimers moving forward to try and offer their support. Unimpeded, that could be fairly significant, but I think the elves do see the danger they represent, and they are firing immediately on the reclaimers. Also, again, decent melee combatants, so definitely well worth going after. It does take away the support from the front line, if only temporarily though, so the elves are going to have to try and use pure brawn to try and make this work. Victory seems certain still. Not much in the way of Orc Hunters remaining. Still that 1 unit of Legion bodyguard though. A very high tier unit still to come. Probably the least remarkable of all the Dwarven units, but still, there's a few Dragon Slayers still in there. I say a few, 2. Alongside the Guards of Khazad-Dum though. I mean, that armour piercing starting to have a real impact. If that catapult still has ammunition, which I assume it does, the catapult crew themselves, after all, when generally speaking, when it's out of ammunition, people will just throw the crew in to be more bodies on the front line. And it is looking like ammunition has been expended. The God Helene pushing their way to the front, essentially, to try and go toe-to-toe with the Guards of Khazad-Dum. I mean, the God Helene are good, but the Guards of Khazad-Dum will still be able to outperform them. See the Khazad-Dum's Guardians still fighting away, but their damage is such that any Pike's damage is going to take a while to crack through Dwarven plate. Don't quite know what these Riders of the Golden Wood are doing. I mean, they'll add more mass to the front line, but they're easily going to be dealt with by the Sons of the Fallen that exist still within this Dwarven push.
Karen Amroth Rangers. I mean, as far as a melee ranger goes, two-handed sword. All hands on deck for the elves. Elven archers still have a bit of ammunition as well, so the elven support not quite done. I think they're going after the Khazad-Dum reclaimers as well, because those throwing axes still finding their way into elven bodies. Ironfoot warriors shaken. I mean, stuff like 117 Ironfoot warriors need to keep their nerve in this kind of situation, which is perhaps why the cavalry is being moved forward. I will give the elves credit that they're not just slamming them in. If they see that certain elements are shaken, cavalry can be enough to convince them to run away. Still trading back and forth. The Legion Bodyguard are on the way forward now, so this is the last of what the dwarves have to offer in terms of pure infantry reinforcements, but it is a significant one, and it is the last of the general units, Rookie Beagle, moving forward to try and help shore things up. And the dwarves are doing the business on the front line. I mean, these guards of Khazad-Dum are at the centre of their efforts. This is going to be the MVPs if the dwarves are able to keep this momentum going, because they'll be able to wade through all of these elven units that do still remain. Much of which still, the fact that they're mostly out of ammunition skirmishers. We mentioned the elves are very competent in this regard, but to ask them to go toe-to-toe with dedicated dwarven infantry is still difficult. Is this going to be enough? The Ironfoot warriors have actually stabilised their morale since the Legion Bodyguard arrived on scene, though, so if they had done this slightly earlier, this could have had the desired effect, but as it is, it's probably a little bit too late, and the elven cavalry, as a result, is merely getting in the way and dying en masse to dwarven blows. Elven archers now out of ammunition as well, joining the front line. Can attrition be the elves' friend? Possibly not. I mean, the Khazad-Dum reclaimers, one of the riders getting involved with them. Still 8 orc hunters, slowly but surely expanding their ammunition. Fine margins, but these are the margins by which the battle could be decided. Further uphill, still the Gwythy Rock Door as well, which could be used in a similar vein. The catapult could yet prove to be the difference maker here. Maybe the risk is not worth taking just yet. Yeah, they're trying to fire, you can tell, but maybe waiting until your own units are a little bit more expended and then rolling the dice, because you stand the terrain being what it is, the dwarves have actually got pretty decent cover against that catapult. You stand a pretty decent chance of as the elves of actually going through the back of your own men, and that could be devastating for you at this stage. They did actually get a little bit of friendly fire there, but far more hits for the dwarves. I think that was a good trade for the elves there. Once again, bit of friendly fire, but again, probably worth it, and this is enough to convince the Ironfoot warriors to rout 90 dwarves running. Lothlorien archers, I think they're trying to pursue, but they're going the wrong way. Medieval 2 pathfinding at its finest. Getting a hit on already routing units isn't really the most useful thing. I don't think you're going to be able to rout guards of Khazad-Dum and Legion Bodyguard, especially not with the general still active. If you get a good hit on the general, maybe. There he is, after all. Lothlorien archers moving forward. The Gwythy Rock Door trying to do the same thing. Is that the moment the elves finally cement their victory? There's still quite a long way to go in this battle, though. Strangely enough. Defeat seems almost certain, does it? Well, there goes one of the generals, the Imladris general at that. It's probably about time. I mean, they've been fighting on the front line against something like guards of Khazad-Dum for a little while, so he's been living a rather charmed existence. I have to say, the Elven archers seem to have done a good job since they started to arrive on the front line as well. I think it may be time for a bit of ×2 speed, given this is a 1 choke point fight. Again, not a devastating hit that, but it is enough to convince the Ironfoot warriors, who just returned, to once again flee from the front line. No respite for the dwarves. trying to push their way close to the Elven front line, which is the right thing to do because it means that the catapult, it cannot afford to take the risk at that point. They do return again though, so they will be able to get themselves back into the fight. Again, 50 Ironfoot warriors. These are the kind of margins by which this battle could pivot. This is a close one, so we shall see as we march towards, not quite in it yet, but close to the final 10,000 frames, which means there's still quite a long way in this battle to go, and much of it is going to be decided in grueling melee combat, because if it were decided by the catapults or by a cavalry charge, I'd imagine the battle would be a little bit shorter than it actually is. Guards of Khazad-Dum still though, I mean, considering it is elves that they're facing off against on the front line, it really does go to show how terrifying a force they are, I suppose. Defeat. Let's see, throwing axes continuing to do their thing. Which may be a little bit of a concern for the elves. Kind of bumping into the back of their own men, which can have an impact on morale of the units. That is the reason that has been given as to why people do it, but generally speaking it's not the most effective thing. I mean, the warriors of Ironfoot warriors try to push their way through. It's worth a go, I suppose, but they end up routing and fighting to the death immediately. Haldia falls, the Lothlorien general, so that means the only general left on the field now is Ricky Beagle's Balin in the Legion bodyguard. Elves are looking very thin on the ground in melee here. Lauren armed archers, there's still a few Kindred of Celeborn fighting away, 17 of them. I mean, there's still Karas Galadon's Guardians, only 10 of them, but they've been involved right from the very start on this fight. The dwarves have pushed their way a long way as well. The Karas Galadon's Guardians were involved when the fight was taking place here. This is a good representation, really, of just how this fight has gone. The dwarves have been making steady but consistent progress up the hill. It's just whether or not they have what's left, what is left in the tank. Do they have what it takes? The catapult, does it have ammunition? I mean, I think they need ammunition, honestly. I think the dwarves might actually be able to pull this off, with the Legion bodyguard still in pretty good health, still relatively rested, comparatively speaking, to the guards of Khazad-Dum. There's still 38 of them. Still 38 guards of Khazad-Dum. Orc Hunters still in support, and they're going to be able to get up here into... How is there still so many frames left at this point? The Elven front line looks to be in complete collapse. Still 6 Karas Galadon's Guardians. Are there hidden Elven units? Have Lothlorien sequestered something away? Because Imladris certainly haven't. We're viewing the battle from their perspective. So, what trickery is this? I do not know. They're riders of the Golden Wood. Fleeing, by the looks of things, wavering. The catapult crew surely is not going to last too long in the face of these dwarven units. I mean, killing off what they can. Where did the catapult crew go? So it's going to have to be trying to give the dwarves the run around with cavalry, I suspect. Again, I find myself rooting for the dwarves in this kind of situation because they've weathered an almighty storm. There are the Karas Galadon's Guardians. Amazingly, the last Elven unit left standing from that defence. They were one of the first in, but this is where their journey ultimately comes to an end. Unfortunately for the Elven cavalry, there's still enough armour piercing and still enough damage to really give them a lot of pause, but I don't know, 16 Gwythi Rockdoor though is a lot of charge potential. There are Sons of the Fallen still alive, though not many. So this is a little bit weird. I do really find myself rooting for the dwarves in this situation though, because if the elves can dig themselves out with cavalry, based upon how things have gone for them thus far, again, I find it very hard to truly support the kind of tactics that we've seen here. They do manage to get in behind with the riders of the Golden Wood. Will they escape into the open field? I think they will. There is one Dragon Slayer here. With each swing of his axe, that would be pretty nasty. Though there you can see the guards of Khazad-Dum getting bowled over. All of their heroics in a melee fight, but the Gwathi Rockdor knock them down like skittles when given an open charge, which, I mean, the dwarves in this sort of situation, they need to consolidate. They can't afford to be spreading themselves out. As much as you may want to cover the ground and prevent the cavalry from getting in behind you, if you do that, there will always be weak points which the cavalry can charge and demolish. And we just saw the devastating potential of the Gwathi Rockdor. If that continues, the elves will win. Not in the way that I was expecting at all, but I don't really see what can be done at this point, based on what I've seen of how units have been utilised. The catapult crew can hold some attention, at least temporarily. Charging into the second legion. The hit and run is good as well. I mean, with nothing but the cavalry to focus on, you won't lose micro on them for even a second. And the catapult crew also managing to... I thought they were going to go after the artillery. I'd be really surprised if the catapult actually had anything really in the way of ammunition left to utilise. The Gwathi Rockdor moving in. And the inclusion of the cavalry, which is always something you have to question at the start of a siege battle like this, could be the reason that the elves do see themselves over the line. Another charge, skewering yet more of the Legion bodyguard. Still all 16 that were alive when they retreated up to this final little plateau are still there as well. The catapult crew, if nothing else, will surely be gone by the end of this battle, unless the Gwathi Rockdor can save them in double quick time. Still not a single rider falls. The riders of the Golden Wood have been somewhat less lucky, but managing to kill off more Sons of the Fallen. Still two guards of Khazad-Dum there, running around like headless chickens, axes raised aloft. Catapult crew. Defeat is only a distinct possibility. Now it seems set, I was going to say. Melee with Legion bodyguard, there they go, finally. So now only the cavalry left to focus on. Will the Legion bodyguard have the minerals to withstand the pressure that they are now under? And now, if I wasn't sure to get a copyright strike, the Benny Hill theme would probably have to be played at this moment. But alas, we do not live in such a world. There goes the last general on the field, skewered as he was, and the last of Erebor gone. Ricky Beagle now stands alone, and he stands alone with just a single unit, I think. Oh no, there are some Sons of the Fallen over here, trying to gather themselves around the catapult, which is not the worst thing, because it will prevent charges from being super effective against the Gwathi Rockdor, but I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't say that it really is on the attackers to make the forward moves. They can't cower, really. As much as I may want the dwarves to go on to win this battle, for, again, reasons I will extrapolate upon in the endgame splash screen, they need to be the ones to take the initiative here. 12 Gwathi Rockdor, so they have taken damage now. What do they do now? I mean, they've got enough space to get a nasty charge there. Although that wasn't the charge, the Lancers didn't come down. They did kill off a couple more Legion bodyguard units. If the Gwathi Rockdor can be penned in against the red line or against the cliff's edge, if they can be made to become stuck, that will be the difference maker. Another of them does fall, but still 29 Legion bodyguard remain. There's still that one rider of the Golden Wood as well, so Lothlorien still doing what they can. I do feel as though there's going to be one decisive engagement here, and this may be it. I mean, the dwarves have consolidated themselves, but at this point there's so few of them that actually consolidating themselves mean the charge is going to hit a unit with its full force. 1 Son of the Fallen, 29 Legion Bodyguard, 28 Legion Bodyguard at that. Riders of the Golden Wood trying to, again, going uphill. Ooh, that wasn't particularly great. Lost his bottle? The incline was there, but that shouldn't have been enough to interrupt that charge. That feels like an order that was given to me more than anything else. 1 Rider of the Golden Wood finishing off another Legion Bodyguard unit. 24 of them now remain, several of them bloodied. Their general lost to them. So, I think the dwarves are well within their rights to put themselves on the hill. They're clearly not going to come down onto even terrain. And for the elves to have the audacity to ask for that in voice chat, I would be spitting feathers if I were the dwarven player and that was the case. Yeah, the lancers can come down no problem at all, and yeah, this is going to be the end. Simple enough. 9 of them now remain. Less, surely. Now, I am no mathematician, but that does not look like 9 Legion Bodyguards to me. And that is, I think, because apparently there are some of them still down here. Have they? Ah, yes. They are stuck. They have been down here all this time. Although, in all honesty, like, as soon as it's a situation where it may as well be an admission of defeat from the dwarves at this point, and I think it will be at that. Because the elves have clearly won. And the cavalry, the inclusion of the cavalry, you have to say, that has been the difference maker here. A strange battle in the end. It's rare that we've seen a dance around with cavalry be the difference maker. As we look out over the map, the vast majority of which we didn't actually get to see in action, sadly, which I didn't expect to in a 2v3, but it was even more constricted than I was hoping for in the end. But yes, the reason why I wanted the dwarves to win is because I really do feel as though was a little bit of an early retreat from the elves, ultimately, to constrict the map into one choke point. I mean, it was an interesting one. It was the ultimate representation, really, of why range support can make all the difference. Because the dwarves really did, they almost had it there. Almost. And that's why I kind of wanted them to beat the odds, as it were, because it's one of those rare situations where if you saw the setup, if you saw the elves retreat early to that one single choke point, even with an army advantage, rangers, a catapult, all of the specialty elven projectiles, silver thorns en masse, split shots, you'd back the elves, especially considering as the crossbows were gone for the dwarves. The dwarves were actually the underdogs in this fight, which is rare, I think, for a defense situation where you're outnumbered. It's rare for you to hold the advantage in my eyes, and I think the elves did on this occasion. The dwarves nearly did it. I mean, consistent progress up a hill where they were being absolutely hammered. It was close, but no cigar. I mean, a very, very close, actually, battle in terms of the margin here. It was, I mean, let's face it, less than 20 elven riders were the difference in the end between victory and defeat. So the slightest thing, even the slightest change in how units were committed, could very well have swung the battle in the dwarves' favour. But like I said, a little bit of an early retreat for me. If they hadn't have done that, then the elves, based on the margin of victory, probably would have lost today against the dwarves, but it is what it is. I mean, it's one of those things that I'm maybe being a little bit overly critical of, because it was, even if it was a rather one-dimensional battle, it was still a very interesting one to behold and a very close one, and I'm sure that many people will also be quite happy that the elves were able to withstand such a robust foe as the dwarves in this kind of situation. But yeah, on this occasion the elves win this old grudge. Let's see what did the damage. Gwaithir Myrdain, in spite of the fact that they were in a situation that was, they were rather a flash in the pan, but they did a lot of damage, as you would maybe expect. I mean, they are, after all, a very strong armour-piercing bodyguard unit, and that's the sort of thing which can be very effective against the dwarves. The Gwaithir Rhokdor, of course, ultimately the match winners. The God Helem, maybe not the amount of kills you would want from them, considering the vast majority of them probably came at range, although when they got committed to melee, they were going up against what, in my opinion, was the single most impressive unit on the field today, Ricky Beagle's Guards of Khazad-Dum. Very, very, very good performance from them. not too many, breaking 100 kills to be fair, given that the elves were on the defence against a numerically superior foe, though that foe being the dwarves does change things somewhat. And it's no surprise either that the lion's share of the kills did come from the Lothlorien side of things, which we can't see because the catapult and the Keren Amroth Rangers, split shots, all of those things were in Lothlorien's favour, whereas Imladris were much more the shield, Lothlorien perhaps the sword, if you will. But yeah, as much as this was different than I was expecting, I am still this was still a good one to show. So big thank you to the Flame of Arnor for sending this one in. Like I said, one of the main supporters of the channel as we've started to make our way through 2023. So big thank you to him. Big thank you to all the other players as well that were part of this battle replay. Looks like the KOS clan, the main contributors to this one. And yeah, like I said, I have now completely gone through my backlog. There will be a battle coming up which is a free-for-all on the Temple of Ulmo, which is probably not my finest work, to be honest, because I recorded it yesterday when I was feeling ill, and I'm still feeling pretty ill today, to be fair, but much more able to function as a normal human being, whereas that one may be a little bit less so. I'm sure you'll see it when it comes out. It's an interesting little free-for-all, but it's a difficult battle to record when you're feeling not great. But it does mean that my full backlog has now been reached once again, so I'm in the situation where as battles come in I can record them, which is a good place to be in, considering this year is still not entirely set in stone with regards to what's going to be happening, but the channel at the very least is set up in the best place it can be, regardless of how events may transpire. So yeah, big thank you to the Flame of Arnor once again, big thank you to all the players. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.